Hello everyone and welcome back to the channel. In today's episode I will be showing you how to replace the proxy geometry with proper subdivided and detailed geometry. Also we will be doing the Lookdev for the acids. So if you're not sure where I am, in my previous episode I showed you how to, or actually it was more a speed up, showing you how I created this environment. So if I'm unhiding all my instances, this is currently what I have. Obviously it's not looking perfect because it's all proxy geometry, but in part one of this scene setup I was showing you how I set up this environment using the mesh network. Looking back through my camera, I will be starting to replace my instances with proper high-res geometry, and if I currently render this, it's really, there's nothing going on. The tree trunk, this is my human reference object, and then I've got my ground. So what I'll be doing right now is I will be replacing this this tree trunk with something better quality for sure. So I've just imported the trunk LOD2, and let's see where it actually is. It's pretty small currently, it's down there, so let's move this guy up and just scale it up to make it fit better. And for now I'll just hide the proxy trunk. So obviously this guy has no shaders assigned, but we will be working on that. So I'm just rotating it a bit and I'm looking through my main camera, and let's try to find a pleasing position for this. So we also have these mushrooms, so I'm just trying to find a nice position for this guy. Let's go into perspective. So camera's looking through there. So obviously the ground is now a bit different, so I need to would need to reposition the vertices. So just going back in the vertex mode and just doing a bit of movement up so it's not floating. I don't know, something like this. We can also do it on the tree itself. So I can select the LOD. There we go. So I'm just moving the roots a bit downwards so it's not floating in the air. Just something like this. The backside is not as important because it's behind the camera or behind the object itself, so we wouldn't see it. So if I look through the main camera now, so I'm pretty happy with the positioning of this guy. So currently still no shaders assigned, but before we, let's just do that. Let's assign the shaders. So currently in the hypershade, this should be an empty object. So I think Lambert, or maybe a default shader, not sure, Lambert 1 exactly. So let's just assign the AI standard surface, and currently the tree trunk, like this object which I imported, is from Quixel Megascans. So if you want to follow along, make sure you grab that object. So let me just import the textures. Right, so I just imported the textures and now I will connect them up to my shaders. So displacement will create a displacement shading node and delete the shading engine. So the out color red or one float channel goes to the displacement value, and displacement hooks up into the shading engine displacement shader. And then we have a roughness, which I want to have a range in between just to be able to control it a bit more. So the out color red goes into specular roughness, and the albedo color is the beauty color. So let's just use an AI color correct as well, just to make sure, or to be able to do some minor color corrections on the input color. And then we have the bump, which is a regular bump node, so we use the normal. Let's just use a bump for now. So create a bump 2D node, hook up the output like one channel, so let's choose red, and connect this guy up. So this connected, so all the ones are connected. I just need to assign the shader. And now is the thing about color spaces, which I'm not sure how exactly the textures were exported. So let's just first see what we get. Alright, so with just plugging in the textures, this is what we get as a result. And it's already looking pretty good. Let's just change the perspective mode. And so this is now the questions. It's always hard to distinguish if this is the correct color space because a tree trunk is occasionally very dark. So Currently I'm disabling the bump, so I think this looks actually correct. But let's see what we have in the albedo. Albedo is like the base color. We should have, I guess, raw. Okay, it is on raw, so I think this is correct, which means that the output is actually linearized. So just to make sure, let's just switch this up to sRGB. Yeah, so this is wrong. So the export is actually raw, which is nice. So let's head back over to raw, and then we know it's correct. So this is the correct color space for this texture. And as you can see, if I head over to my shading mode and switch to basic, you can actually see there's some displacement happening. And depending on how it was exported, you need to adjust the scalar 0 value, which I'm currently doing, and just put it to 0.5. And now you see it works a lot better because the exporter was set to this value. So the 0 value is a grayscale value of 0.5. So we don't have subdivisions yet. So I'll just add one subdivision. So if you check the wireframe, you should see it's decimated a bit better. It's not too crazy because we use the auto bump mode in the displacement node, which adds a lot more detail. So if I would turn this off, you would see how flat it looks. But with this auto bump, which is being generated from the displacement map, you get this nice detail. So checking the shading, and I think this looks for now good enough. So let's just continue working and bring in another asset. So let's bring in the next asset, which would be the stone. So if I unhide the instance, you should see all the instance stones in the scene. And for now, I just want to hide the trunk, so we just can focus on the stones itself. Because they are so small in the scene, I will be just assigning a simple shader. So I will keep the proxy geometry, but I will just assign like a fractal noise pattern with some roughness value. So again, this tutorial is just showing you the techniques of things. It's not about showing you how to render a very beautiful image. It's more about how you can use mesh and randomization controls to create an interesting looking render. So if I check the instancer nodes, I see it's these 3 proxy stones, which are these guys right there. So if I unhide them and I fly through them, flying with the camera and hitting F, these are my stone objects. So very simple geometry. This one is even not subdivided. So these are my stones. And if I hide the terrain, hit save and hit render button, these are how they currently look in the lighting environment. Nothing too special, right? So what we do now is we just assign a standard surface shader. We head over to the hypershade, and I'll just be assigning a few random shaders to this. So this is the shader. So let's just call this AI stone, and the same for the shader name, AI stone. And the cool thing now is we will be randomizing them based on the mesh instance. So before we head into that, I'll just create an AI jitter color, which is like a randomizer. So it has several inputs, and based on user data, procedural data, object data, or face data, it will generate random values. So for now, let's just connect the base color, and let's just call this one as well AI base colors, just that we now know what it's actually doing, and hit the render button. And also I like to go into the isolate selected mode, so we actually just see the raw input. So if I'm locking my render view to this node, I can see that currently white is being randomized. So a value of white is, there's nothing much, not much jitter room to create new values. So currently, if I choose a red value and I hit the jitter color, and I think we can go to object, and I change the hue, we should see a slight offset. You see that there is a difference in color in all those 3 objects, which is exactly what we want. So let's choose a color which is more like a stone color, very desaturated, maybe a bit more brownish and a lot darker as my albedo value. So this would be that. And to make it even more interesting, Let's create an AI noise and connect this to the out color. And in the noise color, let's choose the red the brown we just chose, like this. So now we have this random pattern in the stone texture. So obviously we can add more detail, add some like breakup or whatever. We can change the scale. Let's try maybe 0.25 to make the pattern a bit larger, like this. It's a bit better. And this would be now the output. I make sure this is set to object or pref, so when the objects move, they don't float in space. So this would be AI noise base color, just to make it a bit more descriptive. And this guy connects to the base color. And then in here, we can now change the gains a bit. So let's say we want to make it a bit, some stones a bit brighter, and then we want to make some stones a bit darker. Or maybe let's just keep the default min on 0 and just make them lighter. So to fix this, we can also make the initial color just a bit darker, like this. And this one as well, a bit darker. So there's a slight differentiation. Alright, so this would be now the albedo color randomization. And you can also change the hue a bit if you want to have maybe warmer stones or something, but more or less the hue is very sensitive, so I don't tend to change it as much. So now this is controlling the base color, right? So we want also to control the roughness. So I'll just duplicate both of these nodes, Control D, and I will hook them up together. You can also duplicate shading network, and then you don't need to reconnect them, but this is just, it's not a big problem. So let's connect the spec roughness now. So this would be AI specular roughness, and this would be AI noise. Same deal, specular roughness, and hit save. And let's just look through this node. Should be identical because I didn't change anything yet. And now we just want to use black and white values. So black, and this guy is white. So now we get a roughness randomizer. And we can change maybe the detail a bit so we get more pings on them, on the roughness itself. Maybe make the pattern a bit smaller, so let's go on 0.5. And then we don't want to have these shiny parts on it, so we can actually define the range. So we will go a bit lighter on the min and a bit dark on the output, and now we have actually a nicer roughness value ranging from 0.45 to 0.4. So let's just go a bit darker, like this maybe, and then we can randomize this again. We don't need huge hue shift changes, but we can play around with the gain. So we have like more dusty stones, or we have maybe really subtly darker stones. So these are more shiny than the others. It might be too much already, but we will see that in a second. So if I check my output, this is now what we have for stone. You can see that going too dark and the roughness is just too much. So I just reverted that back to 0, and this is now a simple stone shader. Obviously the beauty color is a bit washed out, so we might need to push the saturation of those values a bit just to get more color in them. Maybe like this, and even up here, and maybe a bit lighter as well. Alright, so currently they are not being scattered, right? So let's just stop the render, hide the hypershade, and make sure they are all back on 0 in the origin. There we go. And if everything went as expected, we should now be able to see the scattered stones with the new shader. If that's not the case, we would need to redo the instance, but let's see if that worked. So let's render from here. And we got the shaders. So this is pretty cool, right? So, and now let's just see if we actually have different stones. You can already see it's actually working. Let me just load in the one AUV. and create the diffuse albedo, which is a raw color. So this, I think maybe albedo, I'm not sure what that is, but diffuse albedo is the one we want. And just start the render and switch the AOV to diffuse albedo, and you can see all those values are being differentiated, right? It's all random. So I'm not 100% sure if this is now just the 3 objects being instanced and that's why it looks random, or if each object is treated random. So let's just go back into the hypershade and have a quick look how it's working. So in the jitter node, I'm currently just changing the object, right? So it might be that we need to change a procedural, but we don't see any change there. So I'm pretty sure we did it correct. So if I change the gain to 1, yeah, now you can actually see it's randomizing them pretty good, which is a nice effect, right? So going back to the beauty, this is obviously way too much. So let's go back up to 0.4, maybe 0.2. And these would be the stones. I think still they are a bit bright. So especially if we have the terrain in there, it will look a bit different, right? But this is showcasing you how to randomize values using mesh or any other instancer. Right, so the next step would be to bring in another instance and doing some Lookdev on them. So I want to use those clovers, which is these small little leaves. And currently, let's just hide the raw stones. Where is it? How is that called? It's not updating. Not sure why it's not updating the clovers, but these are the ones. And it's just a very simple object. There it is. So that's something I modeled. So it's, as you can see, it's very simple. And it will also be simple. So the shader for this will be the most basic you can ever see. It's mostly a green shader with some scattering, but it will be very subtle. And then we will have let's just create this, and then we will have the jitter color as well. So this would be the AI clover, like so, and we do the same here, clover, and let's bring the jitter color, and let's just hook this guy up to the base color, shader back to 1, and call this AI clover base color. Right. So we want to have a basic green as the input, so let's change that to something more greenish, maybe like this, and then we will do a object hue shift and a gain shift. So we can't see this now because we just have one instance. So if I unhide the clover alone and try to find them, and let's try the render and see what we get here. Okay, so looking through the perspective and switching the albedo, this is what we currently get. So it's all one color. All right, so let's see if it works with the object ID, the object jitter. So let's bring in more gain. And there we go. This is working pretty sweet, right? So it's automatically just randomizing the inputs. So let's just go maybe not as bright, maybe 0.5, make a hue shift of 0.1 maybe. Not sure if that did do anything, 0.5. Yeah, okay, it is working. It's just very subtle. So let's just maybe try 2.5 on positive and negative 0.25 as well. So we get a bit warmer, so we can go a bit more on the negative side. So we get now warmer tints of this, and we can also play around with the saturation. So we get a bit more saturated ones, which have a brighter green, and then a few which are less saturated. Okay, this is definitely too much. So 3 should be fine. And let's check the shader. This is how it looks currently. It's not smooth, as you can see. So let's play around with the roughness values. Let's go on 0.5. So this seems to work a lot better, and we can enable the thin film, or the thin, is it thin film? No, sorry. The thin walled. So now if we enable translucency, maybe of 0.2, we should see that they are a bit more see-through. Obviously you can connect the same color there, which let's just do that. Okay, so that's connected up, and we can have a kind of a green tint for the radius. Not sure why this is not. I don't know why I can't change the radius. Is it because of that? Shouldn't be. I think it's just a UI locking up. Okay, so now let's try to actually subdivide those guys. And I need to see if we can do this in the instancer or if we need to do it directly in the proxy. I think let's do it right here and add some subdivision. Just enable this guy to cat Clark, and it will take a while. And now you can already see they are being subdivided. So if I switch my main camera again, you can see all these beautiful, very green clovers, but we will adjust them at some point. So currently I think it will be fine. So let's just continue adding more geometry to this. Alright, so the next instanced object will be the leaves, and to get it started I will just bring in the textures for this. So they are also from the Quixel Mega Scans page. It's just a basic leaf atlas. So AI leaf, and just drag in the albedo, and what else do we need? Opacity for sure, and maybe roughness. So I'm just dragging them in this scene and resorting my setup, and I will just assign the texture to my let's just create a shader quickly, AI standard surface, and I will be assigning the leaf with the shader here, connecting those maps. So the range, this will get a jitter, then we will have no jitter, and then we have another jitter for the color. So the roughness goes in here, the albedo goes in here, and the albedo goes to the base, and the out red goes into the spec roughness, and opacity, the red channel, the out color goes into the opacity. And then make sure on the proxy you have opaque switched off, and we have subdivisions enabled to cat Clark. So currently how this image looks like, it's an atlas of different leaf types like this. So currently I can only choose one of these leaves, and because I will need to remove or realign the UVs of this. So to do so, I will hide the instancer, and I will just frame the leaf itself, which looks like this. And now I just want to see, if I go to the UV editor of that leaf, you can see how it's being aligned. And let's just try to move the UVs. If I can actually make this bigger, not sure, I don't think so, it seems to be locked. Not sure why, but anyways, let's see if we can adjust the UVs to just fit in one leaf. Let's try to use the one on the top right or something. Maybe like the last one, the top right is actually pretty cool. So what I need to do, I just choose my UVs, and I'm just scaling them down to fit in this one leaf. So make sure it's not overlapping, and try to fit in as much space as possible without touching the outsides of it. So you can also just use a soft selection tool. It will adjust the vertices a bit, which is okay. So I'm just making it a bit larger, and this should be actually it. So let's just call this guy AI leaf, and hide the UV editor, And let's see how this one looks now. If I render this, perspective, let's see what we get. So this is now my leaf. It has a proper alpha channel, and it seems to be working just fine. Like this. Something funky going on there in the top, but let's for now just ignore this and make sure we do some randomizations after. So I unhide the instance and I hide the proxy leaf. And let's jump into the main camera. So this is my scattered leaves all around. And let's hit render, and then we see what we get. Main camera. So these are now all the scattered leaves, and I think they work pretty good already, but obviously we don't have the randomization set up yet. So they're currently all the same. So we do the same process. Go to the jitter, maybe call this one correctly AI leaf base color, and this would be AI leaf specular roughness, like so. Okay, so the leaf will have the same effect. So I guess we will do some hue shifts again. So let's just go negative. Oh, red is actually nice. 0.1 and see positive. Or if you can go get a bit more greenish leaves, that might be a bit too much. So let's adjust the gain. Some darker leaves like this. Maybe not as a crazy positive hue shift, so maybe 0.075. Play around with the saturations like this. So now we have actually a nice scattered leaves on the ground. Some are more brownish, yellowish, reddish, so it seems to work. Let's check the roughness maps. How do they look? I don't have the roughness albedo, so I'm just seeing if isolate selected will work on this. So this is the isolated roughness. It's currently very rough, so let's just play down the gain a bit so we overall get a bit more shiny leaves. There we go. So we have now more shiny ones. Let's check the shader. And this is currently what we have. We can also do the same thing, add translucency, but for now let's just ignore that. And I think at some point we will scatter a lot more leaves. So the next thing is I think we should start working on the environment, on the terrain floor itself.